Well. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Good morning, Tim. Good morning, Nancy. We're actually separated by a few hundred miles. We haven't seen each other for a few days, so it's really good to see you. You look
No,
terrific.
this is wonderful.
Uh, Everybody joining in on the chat, I'm so grateful. It's so strange. I've never really understand this well, but it's so moving to see so many of you from so many different places and to have you share your journey and to think we are all part of the fellowship of the withered hand where we're aware of what we can't do, but together we can do something. I'm just sitting here in tears, reading your names and seeing what you have to say. And I just feel goofy.
Yes,
But
Lynn Vander Boss, not funny. Mark DeMel, take a nap. And Becky Heatley, no, I did not know that. Oh my gosh.
Oh my goodness. Amazing. Well, welcome. I want to say welcome to everybody. My name's Tim Williams. I'm one of the behind the scenes folks here at Become New. And welcome to everyone joining. We love reading what's in the chat. As you can tell, we're already reading it and commenting on it. And we love you because we're with you. We feel like we're with you every day. It's such a powerful expression of community to both be taught by John, but we love it when people chime in the comments or send an email or text. So during this video, we would love to have you chime in the comments. Tell us where you're joining from. That's kind of always cool to just see the variety of locations that are represented. And then also, we're going to keep our eye on the chat while we're talking and be looking for any questions that you might have that we would want to respond to, or John and Nancy might want to respond to. So if you've got a question, feel free to put it in the chat wherever you're watching. So yeah, should we get into it?
love to.
Awesome. First of all, John, people loved this series. It was great. I mean, it was one of my favorite. We've been going for 2.5 years now. And I just thought it was so powerful, applicable, practical. And folks loved seeing you in the cabana, right? So that's actually where you live. Is that your home?
That is our home. I'm actually on the road right now, but Nancy is at home, so she's in the cabana.
Nice.
All 500 square feet of it.
500 square feet. And
Yep.
one question is, will there be any more episodes filmed at the cabana in the future? Some people are curious if we're going to see some more from there.
I would be surprised if we don't.
Awesome. Yeah, I actually have I've got a couple behind the scenes photos from that experience. Let me see if I can pull those up really quick. And you guys can feel free to interact with the comments while I'm doing that.
It's just too much.
Yeah, they're flying by so fast. But I love seeing where folks are from and hearing bits
Elsie
about.
and Mark from Portugal.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so here's like a behind the scenes.
245 square feet. Yep, that's our little cabana.
That basically, John, you sat there. I think we started at like 8 a.m. in the morning that day, and I think we were done in time for lunch. So it just sat right there. It was a pretty amazing day. And I, having even been there in the room, I mean, it was powerful for me in the room. I found myself at times just like choking up because you could just feel just the presence and power of God as you were sharing, and how real that content was just pouring out of you. But then even watching it again, it was powerful.
Well, you said, I know one of the persons who wrote in, one of the people was asking, I had mentioned this series kind of been 35 years in the making. And why was that? And really, it's because that's about how long ago I first read that book, Spirit of the Disciplines, where Dallas talks about those activities. And then ended up meeting Dallas and finding that although that was the most impactful book I had ever read, he was better in person, and his heart was better than his mind was. And I was kind of frustrated at that point in life, in having grown up in the church and feeling like I wanted to change, but I didn't know how. And from what I had heard up until that point about spiritual disciplines or spiritual formations, I really didn't like it. I'd read Richard Foster's book on celebration of discipline and didn't like it because it felt like I already felt guilty about not reading the Bible and praying enough. And so having more things to feel guilty about just felt oppressive. And it was really in reading that book, and more than that, meeting Dallas and thinking about what a life can be like. What is it like to be at home with God wherever you are? That made me think, oh, these are actually gifts. They're just things that I can try and experiment with to pursue change. And so to live with not just reading those words, but actually trying to do different things to see how can I be at home with God. I will just never, ever, ever get over my gratitude for that.
Yeah.
And I think, these last couple of years, especially when everything hit and it was so hard, watching all the seeds that Dallas had planted in John just started sprouting. And it's the nature of seeds, but there was a depth that came in John because of the pressure and the difficulty that caused those seeds that had been planted to spring forth in pretty remarkable ways. Hey, Deb, pulling from Colorado. And then Mark asked, John, if you've ever had anybody steal any of your lessons. Years ago, I was in my car listening to somebody's sermon on tape. That's how long ago it was. And the guy's using one of John's illustrations about our children, word for word, putting his own kids in there. And it was such an odd story. I just started screaming at the tape, but beyond that, we didn't do anything. We didn't sue him or anything.
Nancy and I do sometimes argue about whose story belongs to who and who gets to who's not.
Yes.
Yeah.
I thought I would read something. Somebody was asking outside of Dallas, because you talk about him a lot, who are other teachers that help you? And the more I go along, the more people are able to be helpful to me. I think for all of us, if there's a coachable, open spirit that's curious and hungry, you can just learn anywhere. So in thinking about how do we be at home with God, I read this briefly from a guy named Clyde Kilby that used to teach at Wheaton. And I think Tim's got the info on it. But here's what Clyde Kilby used to say to his students. This will take a minute to read through. At least once every day, I shall look steadily up at the sky and remember that I, a consciousness with a conscience, am on a planet traveling in space with wonderfully mysterious things above and about me. Instead of the accustomed idea of a mindless, endless evolutionary change to which we can neither add nor subtract, I shall suppose the universe guided by an intelligence, which, as Aristotle said of Greek drama, requires a beginning, a middle, and an end. I think this will save me from the cynicism expressed by Bertrand Russell before his death, when he said, "There is darkness without, and when I die, there shall be darkness within. There is no splendor, no vastness anywhere, only triviality for a moment, and then nothing." Kilby goes on, I shall not fall into the falsehood that this day or any day is merely another ambiguous and plodding 24 hours, but rather a unique event filled, if I so wish, with worthy potentialities. I shall not be fool enough to suppose that trouble and pain are wholly evil parentheses in my existence, but just as likely ladders to be climbed towards moral and spiritual manhood. I shall not demean my uniqueness by envy of others. I shall open my eyes and ears. Once every day, I will simply stare at a tree, a flower, a cloud, or I shall not then be concerned at all to ask what they are, but simply be glad that they are. I shall joyfully allow them the mystery of what C.S. Lewis calls their divine, magical, terrifying, and ecstatic existence. I shall follow Darwin's advice and turn frequently to imaginative things, such as good literature and good music. I shall not allow the devilish onrush of this century to usurp all my energies, but will instead, as Charles Williams suggested, fulfill the moment as the moment. I shall try to live well just now, because the only time that exists is now. Even if I turn out to be wrong, I shall bet my life on the assumption that the world is not idiotic neither run by an absentee landlord, but that today, this very day, some stroke is being added to the cosmic canvas, that in due course I shall understand with joy, as a stroke made by the architect who calls himself Alpha and Omega. Isn't that fabulous?
Wow.
So there are great teachers everywhere and great things to be learned all over.
Yeah. That's such a great invitation to just recognize God in the day that you're in. I think that's another thing that these videos help me to do. It's the first thing in the morning. Some people have written in and said, I have coffee with John every morning. I've had coffee with John every morning for the last 2.5 years. I don't know that I always have coffee with you. Sometimes I work out with you, John, but you don't do a lot of heavy lifting in those workouts. But I digress. But anyway, it's just been, man, that's a great quote, and it's been a great journey. We walked through 15 disciplines or practices. And I just wondered, if someone is just getting started and they feel overwhelmed by that list, would you have like a recommended practice to start with? Or one that jumps out and says, why don't you start here? Start small. That's something you said. What comes to mind with that?
Yeah. Nance, do you have any thoughts on that one?
Go ahead.
I'll
chime in.
I think a super important thing is don't try to be heroic. And so start with something that's very doable. It's much better to start with something small than you're actually able to do than to try to be heroic with it and be overwhelmed and to give up and feel like it doesn't work. I think it always helps to work backwards. And what I mean by that is I start by asking, what will I be like if I'm living with Jesus in the kingdom, if I'm at home with God? What will my life be like? And maybe it will be, I'll be free from the need to try to impress or please other people all the time. Or I'll be less controlling in my relationships. So what would I be like? And then the second question is, what are the barriers that keep me from living that kind of life, being that kind of person? Like it could be that I'm just hurried all the time. And hurry keeps me from being at home with the Father. So then that leads to the third question. What's a practice that could enable me to overcome that barrier and live that kind of life? And that way, instead of it just being an arbitrary, pick a discipline, any discipline, for it to work well, there actually needs to be, like with any kind of an intervention for healing, diagnosis and then prescription. And you don't prescribe everything to everybody, the same thing to everybody, because we all suffer for different things physically as well as spiritually. So I'll just mention one. If you suffer from joylessness, I was with 5 of us who went to college together, get together for about a week every year. And it's one of my favorite weeks of the year. We just wrapped that up on Monday. My very good friend Chuck was coming in from Atlanta, and his flight got delayed for 9 hours, and he was really disappointed by that. And we were disappointed not knowing if he was going to be able to make it out or not. He's a real feeling guy, so I knew that would be really difficult, and airports drive you crazy. He got in at 4:00 in the morning his time. But my friend Kevin had rented a car, which my other friend, Kevin Penry, told me actually can make fart noises. And for Chuck, if you've ever seen Gary Chapman's book, The 5 Love Languages, for Chuck, that's the 6th in his own personal love language. So we
fart
went
noises?
Yep. Just his sisters literally write songs about this.
Oh my goodness.
So we went to pick him up, and I knew he'd had a frustrating, terrible day. And Kevin started the car doing that. Chuck started laughing so hard. I was sitting next to him in the back seat. Literally, tears are streaming down his face. So for the next 5 days, we would drive all around Santa Barbara. Kevin would pull up to a stoplight, put the car in park, and you can actually have the noises emit from the outside of the car, people standing on sidewalks. And, it was like junior high all over again. We're headed exactly the wrong way. But there is something so healing and therapeutic about just laughing together.
Malia's on right now, Chuck's wife, saying, I can verify all of this.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, I can verify this, wife of Chuck. And there's a lightness of spirit that comes. And so I love that one of those practices is celebration. And if you find that you wrestle with joylessness, which really is a sin, it's a sin of omission. So we don't usually get in trouble for it, but it is. Then the practice of celebration could be a wonderful place to start.
That's great.
Yeah, I think it's not a list like a to-do list that you have to check off for work or a grocery list. In the very best sense of the word, it's like a menu.
Yeah.
And you're kind of going inside to think, what do I need right now? Because it will probably be different in the future. And the point isn't to pick one or two and do them the same way all the time. The point is, these are tools to use depending on what I need in my life right now. And so maybe in that regard, silence and solitude are good places to start, just to get alone so you can answer the question, what does my soul need right now?
Yeah. So
there's something else I thought you might want to tell, or you might not. I think a really good thing is often something might be a spiritual discipline. And
by discipline, you mean practice.
Or practice. Insofar as it's a discipline or a practice, I do it so that I can be changed, so that I can be different.
Yeah.
However, it can also be worth doing for its own sake, even if it didn't bring about change. And serving is often that way. And Nancy, you were with a friend of yours recently, and you talked about singing a song together that you sang as a little girl. And I don't know if you want to tell that story in any way or not, but I thought that was.
And I also think, of course, serving changes you.
Yes.
Yeah, I would not agree with that.
No, you would agree that it changes you. But what I love about it when you do it is you're doing it simply because you love that person and you want to help her.
Yeah.
And that's actually the best way. One of the dangers with practices or disciplines is that I can get self-conscious with it. And then I think, look at me, what a wonderful guy I am.
Sure. Fair enough. So when I was in third grade, there was my best friend, Joy Graham, and my parents were going through a rough time at that stage in my life, fighting a lot, looked like they might get a divorce. And I would go over to her house after school every day until my dad got home from work and could pick me up. Her mom did a backyard Good News Bible Club. And I remember so vividly the song, Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus. And she would hold up a picture of Jesus, very fuzzy and out of focus. And then as we sang the song, she would hold up a picture of Jesus clear. And that home and that friendship with Joy became a respite. Long story, so much to go into, but she's my age and she is now in a nursing home suffering from descending dementia. It's getting worse all the time. And I drove 3 hours out on Sunday to see her. And one of the things we did is we walked out in the parking lot. I brought my dog, so we walked him out. And she has lucid moments. I asked her what it was like for her when her mom died 15 or so years ago. And she said, oh, it was lovely. I sang to her. And then with no other comment, she just started singing Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus. And so she and I sang it together in the parking lot. And it just reminds me of Mephibosheth and David going and saying, who is left from the house of Jonathan that I can show favor to? Joy will not remember that I visited her. Her mom's dead, but I prayed on the way out there and said to Ellie, I'm going out to see your little girl because I loved her and you took such good care of me. And it was a very, very moving 6 hours to drive out there and an hour to spend with her. It was a practice. Yeah.
Wow. It's great. It's great advice. I mean, because what you're inviting people to do is to pay attention to their own life and their own life with God, and then to bring in what's needed for that moment as far as spiritual disciplines go.
Yeah.
It kind of dovetails into a question that came in from someone. This is from Chris in Florida. She's wondering if you could say something about seasons of life, which is what we're kind of talking about as it relates to the disciplines. She expressed this, that all sounds well and good. When you mentioned ruthlessly eliminating hurry, John, from Dallas Willard, that all sounds well and good, but what about when you've got little children, you're waking up in the middle of the night, you're overwhelmed by the demands of life? I would love for someone to address that group of people that feels like I would love nothing more than to ruthlessly eliminate hurry from my life. But how do I do that? Any thoughts for Chris?
Yeah, I think often for people, especially for young parents and especially for moms of young children, conversations about things like spiritual disciplines or how do you arrange your life can be overwhelming with guilt and frustration and disappointment. I remember a woman asking one time in a conversation about like the idea of solitude in the desert and being alone with Jesus. Is there childcare in the desert? And
Right.
for sure, there are seasons, maybe particularly that one, where there are obligations and realities that are placed on you that are completely different than like in this season of life for Nancy and I, when our nest is emptied out. And I think what's really important then is to say, how do I meet God in my own life? Now, it might be possible still to have some times when you arrange with your spouse or somebody, you might be able to get up early or have some time when the house is quiet. Or at night, if you're an evening person, when the kids go to bed, if you want to have some time that is quiet. But I think the most important thing is to recognize, actually, for example, if you have little kids, you're going to be in a position where you're going to be you're going to be serving a ton, and that can be deeply forming. You're going to be worried about them a ton. To be a parent is to be worried, and that can be an invitation to prayer. So instead of looking at this season in my life as an obstacle to spiritual growth, the question is actually, how do I embrace the obligations and the realities of my life right now? There's a woman named Marjorie Thompson that wrote a book called Soul Feast about rule of life. And she was caring for an aging parent at one point. And she said she eventually realized actually that was going to be her primary spiritual discipline, was caring for an aging parent. But it took her a while to come to that understanding.
I think this question is so important. I remember thinking when our kids were little, the word quiet and the word time, and you want to put those two words together. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And one of the things I finally began to form in my mind to tell John is I feel like the pen for writing about spiritual formation has been in the hands of introverted men for thousands of years. And while they have a lot to bring to it, it's so not the whole story. And I would love it if those men would put down their pens and do some laundry and sweep the floor so that my life didn't feel so overwhelming, because it does. And I think it's exactly right that my practices, what I'm cultivating during that season of my life, is patience and re-understanding how the Father loves me like I love my kids. It may not be opening my Bible and reading a verse. It's all good. It's all good. God will meet you in a million different ways during the day if you'll let him. And I think it's important to try to think about, how can I have maybe a busy spirit I have to have, but how can I start to let go of the hurry that I feel and try to understand, why do I feel hurried, so that I can attend to my kids well. But I don't think the practices will look the same when you're in a situation like that. And that's not only okay, it's actually good.
Yeah. Somebody just wrote, but it's already going down now. It's hard to embrace God when you're exhausted.
Absolutely.
I have been thinking a lot.
Yes.
When we're done with this series today. A week from Monday, I'm going to start a new series, and it's called In the Beginning, and it's on the first 3 chapters of Genesis. And I'm so excited about this. There's just such great, amazing, wonderful, rich stuff being written about Genesis. And it gets into everything from God to humanity, having the image of God, sexuality, men and women, temptation, good and evil, work. But one of the themes is rest, Sabbath, and the seventh day. And it gets picked up a lot all through the Bible. Like in Hebrews, there's this constant invitation in the 3rd and 4th chapter, where the writer actually talks about being with God. The image that he keeps using, the language is, we enter into his rest. That on the 7th day, God rested. And the idea is God is still resting. And so to be with him, we're called to rest. And that thought of God wants you to be rested. And now there may be things going on in your life, there often was for Paul, that are exhausting things, but God's desire for you is to be rested. So however we think about practices or disciplines, if we think about them as one more thing that's going to exhaust, fatigue, and drain us, then somehow we're not looking at it in the way that they did. The invitation is, it just goes back to Jesus. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest.
I remember one time with when the kids were little, I was probably 72 months pregnant with Johnny, and I had the other two at the park, and I was exhausted and trying to think, I got to go home and figure out dinner. And how come I'm the one that has to always figure out dinner? And I was just grumpy. And sitting there, a few minutes passed, and I was watching the two others, the younger two, play, and just had this 15-second moment where I was overcome by how much I loved those kids. And I feel like God whispered to me, this was a devotion. As much as any Bible verse you will ever read, the moment you had right now connected you and me together, and it counts. And I think part of it is, even when you look at that list, that's not all that counts.
Right.
Life is spiritual formation, your entire life, every moment of the day. So how do I embrace those moments and cultivate those practices?
That's great. I wonder if, just for briefly, you might say something, Nancy, about the church today. I know that you and your organization, you work with churches. We're talking about this idea of life is spiritual formation. The menu is sort of a menu, and like, what's going on in my life? What do I need right now? And where is God inviting me to participate, and where he wants me to grow and what he's doing? If you were to look at that list of disciplines, or your own list of disciplines, I'd be curious if you made a list of spiritual disciplines. That would be fun. But what would you say?
There would be a list of practices, but feel free to continue.
I think I heard disciplines. Isn't that what you heard?
Not for me, you didn't.
Spiritual practices. What would you say, just the church today, what's an area that, when you look at this list, that could be a good place to double down on?
I think that's a great question, and I'll give you an answer, but I'm going to keep thinking about that, because I think of all the questions that people ask me about the church in the Bay Area, the one that's the hardest to answer is, which church is doing a great job in discipleship? And part of it's hard to answer because discipleship is every part of my life. I get it. But off the top of my head, when you sent these to me, I would say two things. First of all is solitude. And I mean that when I go to a church service, it is crammed for an hour with stuff. There's not a moment, hardly ever, where there's quiet and in a little bit of instruction on what to do with that quiet. I come in sometimes to church joyful, but I also come into church sometimes wounded and pensive and thinking. And if somebody could give me a little space, give all of our people some space to pay it. It's hard to pay attention to what's going on in your soul when there's a swirl of noise all around it. So I think for worship leaders, especially, to be creative and think through, how can and I wouldn't do it every single week, but how can I put some pause in the service and then instruct people not only what to do with it in the service, but then when you go home every day, how do you carve out a little of that quiet? And then I think the other one would be serving the poor and the marginalized. And then talking about that from the platform every Sunday about people in our community that don't know if they're going to be able to feed their kids by the end of the week. There's something that comes out of AA when we're in a difficult situation, just to focus on somebody else who's going through something difficult really frees us up. And to be able to invite our friends to come join us in those serving opportunities, I think that would profoundly change the shape of the church.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Thanks, Nancy. I always value your opinion and thoughts and insights on the church. Just a really quick question for you, John. Several people have written in asking when Barb is going to come back on the show. Are you your sister, Barb, when are we going to see her again?
I love seeing that question. Yeah, she for sure will. I will let her know that people are asking for her. She is one of those people where her laugh is a healing. And when Nance and I were, going through some of the most difficult moments for us, Barbie was just like this giant lifeline. So yeah, for sure, we got to have her back on.
Yeah. And even in context of this, spiritual practices, Nancy, or disciplines, I remember that episode she was on, she just brought this sort of lighthearted, don't beat yourself up, kind of like take a deep breath, you're okay. And I think that's a great contrast even for the idea of disciplines, right? Maria from Minnesota was wondering if you could say a bit more about the discipline of submission. You'd mentioned briefly in the episode that submission in the church can be toxic or abusive. Maria's wondering if you could say a bit more about how you recognize when you're in the danger zone with that word, and how it might work in different relationships. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think cults are kind of famously marked by um, uh, those kind of unhealthy relationships where people are coerced submitting against their better judgment.
Mm.
So I think, one of the things Dallas used to say about practices or disciplines is that when used rightly, they're self-validating.
Mm.
So that if I'm engaging in solitude in a helpful way, my life will be better. I will like my life better and be drawn more into life and love with God than if I'm not practicing it. And that's been a very helpful thought for me, that the right practices are self-validating over time. So if you find yourself in a relationship or a spiritual environment where you're feeling pressure, you're feeling coercion, you are feeling the erosion of your kingdom, you are feeling like people are seeking to force you to disclose things or to engage in actions that you think are not right or healthy or good, then there's a good chance that submission is being used in a wrong or coercive way, and you need to step back, maybe talk to a wise person to get their perspective on it.
That's good. This one kind of goes to Nancy. The episode on confession really hit home with a lot of folks. Heard from a lot of people that felt a surge of courage to take a step of vulnerability that they had not otherwise been thinking to do. And so thank you for that. I know that your talks on that topic have greatly impacted my life in deep ways. But some folks were curious how you, Nancy, feel about John having a confidant in Rick that you bare your soul to on a regular basis. That's not you. Or does John read a list off to you of all your sins every night, all his sins every night before bed? So
he usually does it at lunchtime.
Lunchtime, that's a better time.
I feel really grateful for Rick, deeply grateful for Rick. I think a lot of times in Christian churches, we build this picture up of marriage, and there is so much pressure on the other person to be everything for you in ways that are just incredibly unhealthy and never meant to be. So I feel nothing but gratitude for Rick. Nothing. Yeah,
that's great.
I got a text from Nancy last night, a headline about an aging movie star.
Actually, a very good looking.
Always found inappropriately attractive, and he never was that much. And now it's just kind of sad to watch the deterioration. And his wife, not his first wife, is leaving him. So Nancy sends me this and then says, "Just want you to know you have nothing to worry about." So I'll be talking to Rick today. Interrupted that, but that will be one of the things that I'll talk about next time we have a conversation. Yeah.
Good playful banter of marriage.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
One other thing I want to say that goes back to the whole idea of solitude and serving. When you read the Gospels, Jesus talks more about serving the poor than prayer and what it means to be born again put together. But our churches don't take that seriously. We overemphasize these two things when the preponderance of Jesus's message was about this. And I think to reread the Gospels as churches and think, how do we arrange our churches to be in line with that would be really powerful. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's great. Love it. Well, this series has been fantastic. We're looking forward to In the Beginning, which you mentioned on May 15th. John, I've got a couple sort of just PSAs for folks before we leave. Any closing thoughts on the home front?
The only one is I'm very grateful for people's response and comments. I think trying to find a concrete, non-legalistic, but genuinely life-giving, transforming way of life is the great quest in our day. So to feel like as the Fellowship of the Withered Hand, we're trying to do that together and learn together is deeply meaningful to me. So thanks, everybody. And I do feel like God has matched Nancy and I up in really good ways to kind of complement each other and help me not to say stupid things or things that will be off-putting to tons of people. So I think we can grasp a lot more of God together than we can separately.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
No, and John does that for me as well. It's a good thing. And I think we just have a lot of fun together. We tease, we're playful. And to me, that's one of the most fun parts about our relationship. And again, just to be clear, with the disciplines and the practices, it's how do you expand language so that everybody can hear what they need to hear? So overemphasizing one word or the other doesn't help, but understanding that language gives us a platform for many people to nod and say, oh, I get it. I get it. I think that's what's the most important part about the two words side by side.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that playful banter, I actually have a clip that I took from when I was in at the cabana with you, and I made John do a little photo shoot for me because, we're putting out all this content and I'm like, what do I use to show people John? So sometimes I have him do stuff. Let's see if this comes through and you can hear it.
Jeez, I haven't seen it.
I do not give you permission to use that footage. What'd you guys decide for tonight?
We decided that we'd like to go to the Cheesecake Factory.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I'll meet you guys there at 6:30.
Okay.
I love it.
Great.
Hi. So Nancy's leaving, but I will stay here. Blah, 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 blah. You know what? I'm only doing this, Nance, as a favor to Tim to try to help people, help our team put stuff out, so don't ridicule it.
What?
I thought that was funny.
Yeah. So when I said don't use this, I'm going to be suing you. My lawyer's going to be calling you.
Well, as soon as you said don't use this, I was like, I gotta find a place.
I got to use this.
Yeah.
I understand that completely.
Hey, friends, if you want to hear more from John and Nancy, I just want to let you know we did launch a new series. It's on leadership, and it's called Rediscover Leadership, where Alan George, who's a friend of ours, sits down with John. Y'all talk about leadership. And this next episode coming up next Monday features John and Nancy together talking about leadership. So if you're interested in that, you can go to becomenew.com/leadership and check that out. It's there. It should be a good resource if you're a leader or know someone that could benefit from that. The other thing, just to let you know, is if you want to receive our email, you can let us know at our website. Or if you want to get the daily text, you can just text the word become to 855-888-0444. That'll get you all squared away. I think that's all I've got. So thanks for joining us, everybody. We sure love you. And we'll hang out here for a little bit just to check out the comments and to say hi to you. But we are officially done with the content for the day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.